Well, it's going to be a slightly different tone with this letter. One of the interesting things about these last two churches in Revelation is their contrast. So you have the church to Philadelphia and the church of Laodicea is the remaining churches to deal with. And Jesus addresses them both with the phrase, "I know your deeds." But you're going to be dealing with two polar opposite groups. Now, I do not subscribe to the theory that each of these churches represents a church age. But the contrast between these two, I think, is important in the sense that it gives two examples. But before I get into that, I had been speaking at the City Rescue Mission Monday and Tuesday. And on Tuesday, I dealt with the prodigal son. And one of the things I think that's important to remember and to go over when you're dealing with these sorts of letters and epistles and doctrine is where it is that we come from and who it is that we are. I think it's very easy to get distracted with the endless discussions about different points. Not that there's no place for that, but often people will become bogged down with debating what their position is. And I think the danger in that is that it's the fool who does not delight in understanding, but in the revealing of his own mind, which means that he's more concerned with what he is and what he believes and revealing himself and discovering himself and finding himself and following his heart. That's the fool, because he doesn't want to understand reality. He's not interested in what the answers are unless they pertain to his self-discovery. And so I think it's important that we remember where it is we come from. And so I was going over the prodigal son, and when you study up something, you often find that when you're actually presenting it, certain things will stand out to you that you didn't notice at the time you were studying. And in this case, it was the contrast between the son and his dad. You had the son who goes to his dad, and this is the younger of the two sons. They didn't have any positional authority. And he goes to his dad, and he demands his inheritance. Now, typically, you don't get your inheritance, you don't get your life insurance until somebody dies. So he goes to his dad before he's even dead, and he asks for his share of the inheritance. His dad gives him the money, and the son not only goes, but he goes far away. He goes off to a distant country. He leaves altogether, outright, and he squanders his money with what's called loose living, basically meaning he had no standard by which he spent the money. He just threw it at whatever he wanted and called it a day. And he goes off and ruins everything. He wastes it, and the moment he runs out of his money, which even then wasn't really his money, but the moment he runs out of it, a famine hits the land. And it's a really bad famine to the extent that he's hired out to go take care of the pigs, and when the time comes and he's starving, he wants to eat the pig's food, which generally speaking was not exactly desirable, but he couldn't even have that. And so he comes to his senses, and he decides, I'm going to go home, I'm going to go to my dad, and I'm going to say, and we got this whole script written out, I'm going to go and I'm going to say, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, I'm not worthy to be called your son, hire me out as one of your hired men. Because he knew they ate, and clearly he had reached his end. So he gets up, and he goes home. Now, the interesting facet to me in this is the contrast between these two characters. Because here you have, let's just say, the dad sitting on his front porch. And he looks out, and he recognizes his son coming, which, one, is a miracle in and of itself. Because the son was basically living with the swine. He had no food. He had no ability to buy new clothes. So odds are he stunk and was dirty and was just, the word used was impoverished. And he was just in bad shape. He had nothing. He was repulsive. But his dad is still able to recognize him, and he sees him coming from a distance. And so I asked the guys, I said, think about this from the dad's perspective. Let's say you had a son, and this son doesn't even wait for you to die. He asks for his money now, And so you give it to him, and then he just leaves you outright. So he runs away, far away, wastes his money, throws it away, and I was coming back to you. And it wasn't even his money. It was your money that you had saved up, that you had worked for. And he demands it as though it's his own, and he wastes it as though it's his own. What would you do? You think the strict father would have him come on his hands and knees begging, and he may not even hire him out. But this dad goes and runs out to him before he's even gotten up to him. And before the son can even say anything, he embraces him, and then he kisses him. And again, remembering how the son would have appeared, how he would have smelled. And he does this just immediately. It doesn't demand an explanation. Doesn't take any of it. The sheer fact that the son was coming back was in and of itself a sign of change. And then one of the most interesting facets of this is what the son does with his little script that he had written out for himself. He admits he has sinned against heaven. He has sinned in the sight of his father. He is no longer worthy to be called a son. But he leaves out the request to become a hired man. Leaves it out, doesn't say it at all. He just drops it. And I think the reason that's important within that text, and what we're about to get into here, is you recognize both the absolute humiliation of the son. This guy was, as far as we're concerned, had done everything. Not only did he not do anything good, he had wasted everything. Even the older son recognizes that. I mean, he threw his money at the worst possible things. He didn't even just waste it. He spent it on terrible things. The son recognizes his own sin, like the publican who goes into the temple and he won't even get up front, and he just starts beating himself, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." And he goes, and his dad, on the other hand, doesn't even ask for an explanation. He doesn't even respond to the son when the son admits his own fault. He takes him, he turns around and yells at the slaves to go kill the fattened calf, bring new clothes, put a ring on his finger. He was completely ready. And the reason that's important, the reason that I think applies, is because it reminds us of both who we are, or rather, what we aren't, and who God is. You have, on the one hand, Jesus goes and he's giving this parable, and he's giving it in front of the scribes and the Pharisees and the religious leaders, and he's reiterating what he had said earlier in Luke, that he did not come to save the righteous. He had no concern for people who thought they were already good enough. I had been watching this documentary on hospice care, and one particular lady's mom was there, and she was talking to the doctor. And the doctor was asking if she needed a priest, as she said communion, and she gotten her sacraments, and all that stuff. And the lady says, she's a good person. She's never harmed anyone. She took care of everybody. She's a good person. Well, to be frank, Jesus didn't came to save a good person. He had no interest in saving these people who were determined they were righteous. He goes and is surrounded by tax collectors. He's surrounded by the prostitutes and the sinners and the Gentiles, the Samaritans. And so we don't look at ourselves as being good people that Jesus rescued from hell. We look at ourselves as people who rightfully deserve to be there. And for, as far as we're concerned, no apparent reason, he shows the kind intention of his will. And so we, on the one hand, are that irresponsible, stupid child. And on the other hand, you have God, Christ more specifically, who is sent here. He has no interest in the acceptance of the righteous. He has no interest in being taken in by the religious elites or the powers that be. He goes and does what he has to do for the sake of these sinners. And so we get to this church in Philadelphia. In Revelation 3, verse 7, "And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, He who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens, says this, I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door, which no one can shut, because you have a little power, and have kept my word, and have not denied my name. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. I will make them come and bow down at your feet, and make them know that I have loved you. Because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I also will keep you from the hour of testing, that which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, so that no one will take your crown. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it any more. And I will write on him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. So, a couple things to begin with. One, again, going back to who's talking. Here he says, he who is holy and true, basically translates to the genuine one. He is of all holy people, of all holy things, of all righteous things, of all things that are true. He is the standard of it. He is the definitive example of uniqueness while being the standard of righteousness, because he himself defines it. He is not merely a practitioner of goodness, but is himself the standard of it, defining both its various attributes and qualifications. He is literally the genuine Holy One. He is no copy nor a mimic of holiness, but rather any other who is seen as holy is only so by their association with him. So the only way anything can be considered holy or righteous or true or good is to the extent that it compares to him. While Christ has been compared to a door before, in John 10, 7 through 8, he is now seen as the key holder of the doors. So you look at, a lot of people, I think, get stuck on different attributes of God and of Christ, and will focus on different things, but you have to realize he is not simply a guy who showed up a couple thousand years ago and did something so that we could get to heaven and get out of hell. Not a get out of jail free card, but rather is in both the present tense and in a very definitive way, the only means by which you can get to that life. So a lot of people, I think, look at it as here we're selling a get out of jail free card. And so we'll offer you this, we'll explain the benefits, we want you to take this, and you'll be set for eternity. But that's really not what we're offering at all. What the gospel offers, what Christ gives, is not some portable thing that can be moved around and changed to fit whatever circumstance it's in. Rather, he's drawing people to himself. This is why you don't have Jesus making a building and sitting there and everybody has to come to him. He goes around, he wanders around the wilderness, and people do come to him. But it's more of him setting a standard. He is not a card or an opportunity in that sense. He is a door that people come to. And I think that's important again, because what you have is that comparison between the prodigal son and his dad. The father did not go and change himself for the sake of the son. The son had sinned, as far as the parable is concerned, against his dad, in so much as he took advantage of the money that he should have really been more respectful towards. And he takes advantage of it and wastes it. So his crime, legally speaking, was against his father. His father didn't change the standard. He forgave him. But the son came back to the father. And you look at Jesus describing himself as not only the one who is holy and true, so he's the standard setter. You can't go and say, well, Jesus loves all good people, in the sense that there are good people, and regardless of their views religiously, he cares for all of them. But rather, they all have to come to him to meet any standard of good. And so to boil that all down, it's basically to say that all of us are terrible, unrighteous, unworthy, wretched people. And the only extent to which we can ever be considered good or saved or enter into heaven or any of that is by going to him. And so this introduction is narrowing down who's talking, not simply as somebody externally who looks down at these people and says, well, you're good, I'll talk to you. but somebody who they had to come to in order to be saved, and so now he addresses them. Robertson's word picture puts it as Christ, as the Messiah, has exclusive power in heaven, on earth, and in Hades. Christ has both the power to admit and to exclude of his own will. And so what you're dealing with is if you went to the gates of heaven, as it were, the only one who can open those doors is him. That's it. He's the only one you can ever go to open. There's no St. Peter sitting at the entryway screening people. You have Christ as the only one who has the right to open it, which means he doesn't just have the right to open it for the righteous or the saved. He has the right to close it. He has the right to reject, as the parable of the 10 virgins, who many of which weren't prepared. And so they come banging at the door because they're late, and he doesn't open it for them. He just rejects them outright. So he has the right to both admit people into heaven, into the kingdom, and the right to exclude it. So you're not talking, well, if I meet this standard of good, then I'll get to heaven. No, you have to meet his standard, and that alone, and he has the full right to reject you. Because of his position in both holiness and truth, he can both deny entry to his kingdom, but then there's the other side of that. And so what I want to focus on here, you can spend almost an eternity talking about all the things people get wrong, and I think we'll kind of get to that partially with the next church. But here, the emphasis is not on the religious elite. It's not on even necessarily sin. But the emphasis here is who is talking. Because he not only looks at the unrighteous and can reject their entrance into the kingdom, but he looks to this church, this small group of people, and he guarantees their entry. And when you look at it that way, when you don't look and you're afraid because what if Christ rejects you, or what if you die and you did something bad and you don't get to heaven? No, look at it from the perspective that he has guaranteed it. And with that, we then get into the actual substance of it. Because the wording of assurance, this is wording of assurance because of his control. He's not guaranteeing it out of some nice gesture as though he hopes you get in. He's guaranteeing it, he's assuring it because of his control, because he is the holy and true one. He is genuine. And is the guarantee, he himself is the guarantee of what he is about to say. No one can alter what he wills, nor can they add to it. While they might attempt to pervert his words, they can't actually alter them. Nor can they change the intent of his mind, nor the outcome of his decrees. The highest power that the enemy has is to attempt to distort our understanding of it. But it does not change what it is. No matter how bad things get, no matter how bad the world gets, they cannot change what is true. All they can try to do is mask it and trick. That's about it. And such is the limitation of injustice and perversion. They only have the power in the moment, and that only through perception. It does not actually change anything. And then he begins, this phrase that he used, I know your deeds, can be both absolutely terrifying, as it will be with the next church, but in this case, absolutely comforting. Because one of the first things you note in this is he doesn't really tell you what their deeds are. Right? With the Ephesians, he says, I know your deeds, that they hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans. He lists something specific there. But the only thing that he qualifies them with is their perseverance in what they were doing. But he doesn't say what that is. But imagine if you got a letter from Jesus, specifically, and he addresses himself as who he is, that he is the one who is in total control, he is the sovereign key holder of heaven, he has the right to guarantee your entrance, and he says, I know your deeds, I know what you've done, I know what you think. But not in a negative sense, right? We almost immediately, almost intrinsically ascribe that to something bad. That if your parent called you to the room and said, I know what you've done, typically you panic, you guard up. But imagine getting to this point where he says to you, I know what you've done, in a good way. I know your deeds. The same words are spoken to Laodicea, and yet with a drastically different implication. He doesn't cite specific works, but rather he simply directs them to one simple trait. They didn't quit. That was it. That was the highlight of their goodness. They didn't quit. It is a commendation of the attitude behind their works and their perseverance in them. The Lord is fully aware of what occupies the hearts and minds of all men, as he judges the intentions of the heart, and is therefore more aware of the deeds and motives behind them than anyone else could possibly be, including ourselves. So it's not like he has to learn anything about us. But the single sentence should, in and of itself, be both the motivator and restrainer of our actions, as he is always present. We're not busy thinking, well, what would Jesus do? We already know what he did. So it's not hard to go and find what he did. You can speculate about your hypothetical God and what he would do in your weird circumstance, but we already know what he did. The question isn't what is God's will. The question isn't what is the truth, what is the good thing to do. The question is, how do I make myself do it? It's not like the standards changed because we're here 2,000 years later. It hasn't. But at the same time, it's a motivator. That when you are persevering, you're not quitting, you're doing what you should be, even at the cost of yourself, financially, emotionally, personally, physically. He knows. This is the whole, what Jesus told them, to go pray into a closet. Don't do it out in the open for everyone to see, because then you get your reward in full and that's it. The Father recognizes the things which are done in secret. And so when he says, I know your deeds, we should look at that not as a terrifying thing, because he knew our deeds before we did them. So it's not like we've done something that's changed our status of salvation. He already knows. And so he knows their deeds, and he knows more specifically the fact that they did not quit. Behold, I have put before you an open door, which no one can shut, because you have a little power. And that's an interesting phrase. There's been some discussion as to what that means. You have a little power. Is that referring to the number of people? Typically, militarily speaking, when you talk about the power of an army, you're often referring to the number, as far as numbers and then equipment and so on. And so you'd say, for example, we are so many people strong. Or is it referring to their influence in society? What exactly is he alluding to here? And I think it's pretty straightforward. He doesn't expressly mention their number. It's presumably that they're small. That's generally the case with most of the churches. They're generally not popular. They're generally not populated. So typically they're pretty small. But I think the words behind it imply not just how small they were, but look at it more of a gas tank. They don't have a lot left, either in terms of number of people. It's hard to say how many people would have quit or been killed or imprisoned at this time, but historically speaking, it can be assumed that they were obviously persecuted, so that's not hard to draw. But also just motive. And it's not that they've been burned out. It's that they've been used. My Bible, one of the main reasons I'm not using it right now is just because it's kind of coming off the seams. The cover has been pulled apart a bit. It's been used, right? So, and it's not in a bad way. It's just worn. I mean, we're people. That's generally what happens. The more you do something and the older you get, you have less energy because you spent it. And so he knows what their deeds is. He knows what their perseverance is, and they've spent their energy. And typically you would think if you have somebody who has spent their energy, who is small in number, who doesn't have a great deal of influence, you would generally go easy on them and say, okay, we're done. Write out the rest, retire, you're good, call it a day. But instead, he gives them an open door. And this is obviously an open door of opportunity, as they say. But when you look at who he is as the key holder, he's somebody who has the right to open doors and close them and guarantee their opening or guarantee their closure. Here he is guaranteeing what he's going to do for them as far as an opportunity is concerned. He's going to open the door for something in particular. And so the royal key holder opens the door for the utilization of their remaining strength. This is a result of their dedication towards Christ, with an unwavering adherence to his word. Basically, they had proven themselves to be his workmanship, not a tool of the world, and he acknowledges their deeds and then provides them a door to complete their work. These are proven people. And I think you just take that by itself, that you are able to have a group of Christians who don't have any sort of condemnation. He doesn't tell them to correct anything. So clearly it's possible to have a church that's actually doing well. And then to take that church and to say you've proven yourselves by not quitting, by doing what you're supposed to, by not denying his name. And then he takes that church and he uses them more. Because that church, more than any other group, is primed to be used. And so, he opens the door. But what is the nature of this opportunity? There was a particular group of Jews who persecuted the church in Philadelphia, who attempted to get this church to deny the name of Christ and accept either a perversion or a complete abandonment of Christ's word altogether. And this was not uncommon. You go to the church in Galatia and you can see the side effects of that attempt, as they were called Judaizers, would go in through different groups and either attempt to say, well, yeah, we follow Christ, we follow Jesus, now we're going to add on to that. In the case of the Galatians, you're going to add on circumcision to it, and if you don't adhere to that, well, then you're doomed. Or you even go into things like Acts 15, 1 through 12, and you have the church is gathering in what's called the Council of Jerusalem, and they're debating, as there were Jews going from Gentile churches to Gentile churches, challenging them, telling them, you have to adhere to the law, you have to do this, you have to do this. And so they were dealing with this a lot in the early church, trying to deal with this group that was trying to tell them there was more to it. And so clearly they had attempted to go after this church as well. And again, he doesn't go into any particulars, just that they were being persecuted. They were trying to get them to reject Christ as far as denying his name. And these made an effort, apparently, to tell everyone about their Jewish superiority. And this, again, is not uncommon. You find this throughout the New Testament. That we are Jews, we are sons of Abraham. This is even being dealt with in John. We're not some adulterous group of people. We're not perverted. We are sons of Abraham, so we're good. So just follow us. We have it up on you Gentiles. So they wanted to make everybody else know. And yet, Jesus, again, the not only the key, but he's the son of David, so he's not some lesser-known Jewish line. He denounces this so-called advantage by declaring them to be both liars and, worse than that, attendees of Satan's religion. They are attendees, they're members of Satan's church. I mean, that's no small claim. By default, any who are not Christ's are tools of the adversary. And by means of their opposition or indifference to Christ, they make themselves his enemies. So think less that the world is a large neutral zone with pockets of Christ churches and Satan synagogues, and more that anywhere outside of Christ's church is the synagogue of Satan. You have some that are more so than others, in the sense that you have some who it would be better if they had not known than to know and reject. But one way or the other, there's no neutral ground here. You can't say, well, yeah, they didn't go to church and they didn't really believe in Christ, but they weren't bad people either. They were good people. They never harmed anyone, so they must be okay. But then, of course, you get to the infamous Jews coming up to Jesus and saying, hey, did you hear about what happened to those Jews who were offering their sacrifices, and Herod comes and he kills them and he sprinkles their blood amidst the sacrifice. And of course they probably expected him to do what people do today. Oh, what a tragedy. How could a loving God do that? Well, Jesus not only gives the response to that, but he gives another example. Yeah, what about the tower that fell on those people and killed all of them? What does he say to that, though? Well, they were good people. Or better yet, they were bad people. They deserved it. They had it coming. Maybe they must have done something bad, like Job's friends. They must have done something terrible to merit God's judgment like that. But Jesus says, no. You think they were any worse than you people in Jerusalem? He writes everybody off altogether, that they were no worse than anybody else, which isn't a compliment to everybody else. Because then he says, unless you repent, you'll die too. So he puts everybody on the same plane here. And so everybody who is outside of Christ's church, one way or another, by implication or direct action, are a part of Satan's church. This is why these people are unaware of their membership in Satan's church, much like Christ said that they would be. Because they come and they say, we're sons of Abraham, so we're better. We clearly can't be sinners. Why do we need to be set free? But then Jesus retorts back with, no, not only are you bad, you're children of the devil. You're not just attendees of his religion. You're his children. You're his offspring. You can't help yourself. You're tied to him naturally. And so these are liars by implication of their opposition to Christ, being children of the father of lies. But a lie is simply anything which is not the truth. Now, you can inadvertently lie and not know it. And I think that happens more often than we'd like to admit. And so you have this group, children of Satan, attendees of his religion. Their superiority as far as their ethnicity makes no difference. But then what Christ tells them here, again, is just, it's odd. Because he doesn't say, now you go out there and you preach the gospel to them and you get them saved. We don't know if these people were saved. We don't. It doesn't tell us, and apparently it's not really relevant. What we do know is something changed. These groups had been persecuting this church for a while, trying to get them to deny the name of Christ, but at some point, he's basically telling them it's going to click with these people that despite the fact that they weren't real Jews, they weren't real Israel, they weren't as good, despite the fact that this church in Philadelphia was a small group with a little power, these people are going to catch on to the fact that Christ loves them. At some point, they're going to come, they're going to bow down, and bow down does not mean worship. It is more of a symbol of either respect, reverence, or admission, in the sense that they will come and bow down to you as almost defeated enemies. But it's why they do this, why they concede. I will cause these who say they are Jews and are not but lie, I will make them come and bow down at your feet and know that I have loved you. So they can't deny it. And so what Christ tells them is that they would be forced to the conclusion that these Christians were, in fact, children of God and genuine worshipers of God. This is not unlike the conversion of the Apostle Paul in Acts 9 and mentioned even in Galatians 1, where he was in the midst of his zeal. He was determined what he was doing was for God. He was determined he was right. And on the road to Damascus, he was on his way to go and live out the zeal of his religion. And then Christ comes, and again, I know I've said this before, but it just bears repeating. Saul's knocked off his horse. He's thrown off. Nobody else can understand what's being said. And Jesus calls out to Saul, saying, why are you persecuting me? And there's a couple interesting facets about that. One, he repeats his name twice, so it's a point of emphasis. It's calling out specifically to you, Saul, not to the other guys, but specifically to you. Why are you persecuting me? And Saul doesn't say, who are you, Lord? Because he didn't know who God was. He wasn't some atheist. He knew very well who God was. He was very, very good at what he did as far as Pharisaically speaking. He knew the scripture. So when he calls out, who are you? It's because he thought he was serving the Lord. And when the Lord comes and says, you're persecuting me, clearly he had been wrong. He had been off. Somewhere on the lines he got this completely wrong. And so it's similar here in the sense that they will recognize that they were wrong. We don't know if they were saved. Doesn't tell us. Just that they admit. And it is important to note here that belief in God's existence and even the deity of Christ is not in and of itself a saving belief. Just because you admit that somebody was right or you were wrong, it doesn't mean you follow it in terms of belief. But this is an open door for the church. So this is the door he's going to open up for them. This is going to be the opportunity he gives to them. And I think there are three facets of this. One, they can see the hand of God regardless. Whether or not these Jews were saved, they can see God's hand, watching as those who hated them turn to acknowledge that Christ does in fact love them and cares for them, possibly by means, as far as these people changing their minds, by means of the fact that these Christians persevered in the face of such persecution. They pushed them, and they pushed them, and they pushed them, and they didn't quit. If these were saved, it was by means of the gospel that they likely saw through these saints when the Jews came to them. Either way, the hand of Christ was seen through such a dramatic change and was the means by which the church's remaining strength would be utilized. So he was going to bring to them their persecutors, and they were going to admit that they were wrong. This is your opportunity. And I'm not going to dwell too long on this next part because there's lots of debate. But he says, because you have kept the word of my perseverance, I will also keep you from the hour of testing, that hour which is about to come upon the whole world, to test those who dwell on the earth. Well, what is this? And funny enough to me, even the people who hold to a pre-tribulation rapture view can't definitively say that that's what this is talking about. They theorize that it is, but they admit it may not be. And there's debate as to what is this? Is this referring to something that happened that we don't know about? Is this referring to the tribulation? I think the answer is pretty simple. You have to ask a few questions. So, where is this testing? Where is it going to happen? It happens in the whole world, which can be interpreted as the inhabited earth, which means the world as far as where people are concerned. God's not judging trees and plants, he's judging people. He's going to test the world. So the question isn't as to where it's going to happen that the debate occurs. The majority of the debate will occur as to when. There's two interpretations. This is either referring to events occurring on or around 70 AD or another event at that time, we don't really know. Or it's referring to the Great Tribulation, which is yet to occur and is therefore future tense. One, I don't think one way or the other it affects our eschatology too much, even if it is referring to something that's already happened. It doesn't say much about it. But I do think this is future tense. There's a couple of reasons why. One, he's already alluded to this to other churches, both Sardis and Thyatira. He tells them about the events which are impending, and considering what book this was written in, I think that kind of tells you what he's talking about. Who is this talking? Who is this testing for? It's directed to those who dwell on the earth. In other words, those who are not in heaven. So it's meant for people who are alive at the time of this hour of testing. What is the testing? Now, a lot of people will think, well, Paul told the Thessalonians that we are not of the darkness nor of the night, so this can't be us. Why not? Why can't we be tested? James 1-3. What was that fiery trial? 1 Peter 4:12. It's funny to me that people think that we couldn't possibly go through great tribulation. Why not? I don't see anywhere that says we can't. Paul doesn't say, you're not of the darkness nor of the night, so that must mean that you can't be judged, in the sense that when all these things are going on the earth, you can't be there. Oh, is God inaccurate? Is he just a poor aim and just has to hit the earth and just, whoop, sorry for you people? No. The hour of testing is not directly tied to condemnation. Testing is a very simple concept. It's to test something, to take something, and to find out if it is genuine. So you have the one who is holy and true, the genuine standard of righteousness, and he's going to test the whole earth. And he's going to test it by means of destroying the economies. He's going to destroy thirds of the earth in different sections. He's going to ruin the waters. He's going to get signs in the heavens. He's going to put to test every aspect of life. So he's going to test. He's going to test those who dwell on the earth, because those who dwell on the earth at the time of such an event are those who will either concede and become those who blaspheme up until the very end, or those who must, as Paul tells them, and as Christ is telling them, persevere and endure to the end. So, I think it's actually a very simple concept. And I think we can gain a lot from it just by looking at it in its plain context. One, what does he mean that these will be kept from it? Well, one, we know that this particular church, if we're going to take it literally, he said, to this church in Philadelphia, you will be kept from that hour of testing. Pretty sure they're not on the earth right now. So there's one way to look at it. He doesn't say, and all who follow me will be kept from that hour of testing. He doesn't say that. He just says this group doesn't. And I think that could be implied that that's because they had already done well. They didn't need it in this sense, but in the other sense, he's just telling them, you don't have to worry about it. They won't be here. And they're not. But on the other side, as far as we're concerned, again, when you take the definition of what it means to take something literally, as far as studying the scripture literally, it means to take into account what these people would have interpreted it to mean at the time they read it. What did it mean to them because it was written to them? So, here they are alive. They're being persecuted. They're told he's going to open the door. These people are going to come and recant their persecution of them. And he's telling this church, you don't have to go through the hour of testing. You've persevered, you've endured, we're going to keep you from that. But are we afraid of the testing? He hasn't given us that guarantee. And why would we be afraid of it? I think so many people are afraid of the thought of going through the Great Tribulation, either because they think that God is required to send the locusts on us and we're going to be burned up on the third of the earth. I mean, the poor Israelites in the middle of Egypt as he's smiting the whole land with all these different things, and they went unaffected. Again, is God inaccurate? Is he just a poor aim and just can't help but hit everything? I don't have to worry about it, because who's the one causing it? The one who is holy, the one who is true, the one who has the key of David. And not only that, but as he began in the beginning of Revelation, he is the key to death and Hades. So he controls every aspect of those who both enter into heaven, and he can reject their entrance into heaven and put them into hell. So if he's telling you don't worry about it, then don't worry about it. These particular Christians are not going through his hour of testing. And like many before us, they were not required to go through the hour of testing. How do we know that? Because they're not here. They're not on the earth. They were taken to their eternal home before his coming. But for us, since he has not yet come, and yet while we are alive and remain, we must endure to our end as well. Not fearing his coming judgment. We actually want it to come. You take John, who sees everything in Revelation. At the very end, he's seeing everything that happens here. And his conclusion is, oh no, it's make it happen fast. Come quickly, Lord Jesus. Come now. He wants it to happen now. He wasn't afraid of what he saw. And so Christ, who speaks personally here, is returning quickly. This is the motive. This is the whole point behind the parables of the faithful slave, the one who is expecting his master, the one who is busy doing what he's supposed to be doing. You have the disciples who Jesus ascends into heaven, and they're all standing around looking up and wondering. You have the two angels up the side saying, what are you doing? Get to work. He's going to come back. He's going to come back in the same way. So it's not that you're going to miss it. Paul even had to emphasize to the Thessalonians, don't worry as though someone's going to miss out on this. Get to work. Be that faithful slave who is doing what he was told to be doing when his master finds him. Don't be the lazy slave who says, he's not coming for a while, don't worry about it. He came back in 70 AD, so I guess we don't have to be concerned about that. Just expect him all the time. We know for a fact that Christ did not return within the lifetime of these Christians, because he's not here now. However, The expediency of his return is not contingent upon our lifetimes, nor the perception of our delay. His return need only wait until the fullness of his own are secured and the gospel has been preached to all the nations. 2 Peter 3. Why is it that he hasn't come yet? What is his reasoning for not coming yet? Because he's not willing that any should perish. He's giving time. He's showing patience for all those who are his. And as these letters were directed to all of the churches, we are instructed elsewhere the same. We are to be expecting him as long as we are alive. And because of his return, we are to strive to persevere and endure, making sure that we can say the same thing Paul said in 2 Timothy 4, that we did what we were supposed to do. We didn't quit. Is it the standard of success? This is a little pamphlet that the church got here about church growth, and it starts off with, this pastor started back in 1980-something, and he started off with this tiny church of 31 members, but then the next year he started a growth program, and the next they had a bigger church, and they had all this stuff, and they had campgrounds and this and that. That is by no stretch of the imagination church growth. I think that applies more to the next church than it does this one. But the standard of success is persevering. This simple thing you can take away from what the Philadelphians did right was that they did what he said. It's his standard. If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And they didn't quit. Was it? Precisely what they were supposed to do. They kept going. And so, what's the benefit? What is the outcome of this? Why do it? Why not quit? Why not give up? Because you have kept the word of my perseverance. It will keep them from the hour of testing, which is about to come on the whole world, which will test those who dwell on the earth. I am coming quickly. Hold fast what you have, so that no one will take your crown. And the crown isn't, so many saints saved through your soul-saving work. You have so many stars in your crown because of all the people you saved and all the good things you did. No. What was the crown called that Paul was looking forward to having, and to all who loved his appearing? Righteousness. Righteousness doesn't mean I am a saint who has a halo growing on my head. It just means you did what was right. Righteousness literally translating to the right, not the wrong. The good, not the bad. The correct answer, not the wrong one. The crown of righteousness certifying that they were not unrighteous. Don't let anyone try to take that away. Don't look as the world is offering you an alternative. Look at what they're trying to take away from you. He who overcomes. Here's the benefit. Why keep doing this? Why would we sacrifice so much in terms of money, time, patience? Why spend time going to church every week and reading and studying and listening to these things? Why do it? Well, so people can see how good I am here. Well, if that's your motive, then that's all you're going to get. Why do it? What happens to the person who overcomes, who doesn't quit, and who overcomes themselves? I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. In other words, you're a part of it. Historically speaking, said that they would put different names of people associated on pillars of buildings, but I think it's more than that. We're just a part of it. We're integrated into it. We're not some guest. We're a part of the temple of God, of his God, and we'll not go out from it anymore. There is this song that I came across recently by Isaac Watts, and towards the end of it, he talks about how, unlike all the people who are coming and going, people who are coming and going out of the temple of God, they're visiting or whatever you want to look at it as, much like David, had no desire to leave, become integrated with it. Why? Why would you want to be a temple or a pillar in a temple or not to leave it? Because I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God, and my new name. If you look at yourself as that prodigal son, as that person who has squandered opportunities, who has taken what wasn't yours and wasted it, which is everything. You recognize as the publican in the back of the temple, can't even walk up front. We don't try to boast about ourselves because we, better than everybody else, knows the disingenuous side of it, the intent behind it, how bad we actually are. And then you go and you take the father who, in this case, sends his only son. And I love giving this example at the mission. You take a court, you have the jury, you have the evidence, you have the judge, and you're condemned. The jury unanimously agrees you are the worst. Their evidence is overwhelming. You can't even deny it yourself. The death sentence is handed down. You are absolutely doomed. And then he goes, and after the death sentence is passed down, you go out to the firing line, and they put you up against the wall. They put the blindfold over you. They take aim, and then they pause. And the judge comes out, takes the blindfold off you, pulls out his son, puts it on him, lines them up, and then says fire. The takeaway you should take from that is not, well, clearly I'm better than his son. What did he do? The takeaway is not only, I don't deserve this, he didn't deserve it, but that when he guarantees something, he's not just letting you into heaven because you didn't do something terrible. If that were our standard, Hitler would be there because Mussolini was worse than him. Standard isn't the good that you did. It's not because you were a good person or didn't harm somebody. God didn't come to save the people who did good and didn't harm people. He came to save the sick, the sinner, the tax collector, the prostitute, the liar, maybe even perhaps these people who persecuted the church like Saul. And then he puts his name on them. It's the song, His Robes for Mine. He doesn't just take off our sinful state, our nature. He puts it on himself and then puts on us himself. I mean, his title. And then he goes and takes what we should have had. And then we are, as it says, welcomed home. We're not just there as a guest. We're not just looking at the temple. As it were, we're a part of it. We don't have to leave it. We're home. And more importantly, we're his. So if you take that, you put on his name, which is what Christian should mean. You put his name on you. You have the name of his city, so you're guaranteed as a citizen there, as Peter addresses. We don't belong here. And this city will come down from heaven, from God, and you have his new name. And he says, I know your deeds. I know. He who is holy, who is the standard of it, who is true, there's no lie found in him, there's no deceit, and who has the key of David, he has the royal lineage, he is the king, who opens and no one will shut, who has the right to throw you into hell, but instead guarantees your entrance into heaven, who, as in the beginning of Revelation 1, John falls down as a dead man, and Jesus picks him up, puts his hand on him, and says, don't be afraid. He doesn't just say, don't be afraid, he tells him why. I have the right over death and Hades, and I'm telling you, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Because I died. I already did what you were supposed to. And then I'm alive. So he who has an ear, pretty sure that's all of us, let him hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To conclude, see what that actually looks like. Revelation 21. Here's the literal fulfillment of what he's guaranteed them, of what he's promising them, of the guarantee of the seal of God that no one can take away. This is the result when he says invest your treasure in heaven where it can't be taken away. It doesn't just mean, well, do good things and maybe you'll get some physical version of gold in heaven with your name on it. This is the byproduct of that. We don't do it for nothing. After the judgment seat's been done, after the second resurrection is over, and those who are doomed are in fact have their fate sealed. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. This isn't some city built up by the saints. This is the place that he said he was going to go and prepare. And fun little fact, if Jesus took 6 days to make this, and it's before its fallen state. It's a fun little mental exercise. What do you think it's going to look like with 2,000 plus years? So this is the new Jerusalem coming out of heaven from God, made ready as a bride adorned for her husband. He's purified it. He's taken its residents. He's put the name on them. They are righteous. They are holy. They are true. They are good. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is among men, and he will dwell among them, and they shall be his people. And God himself will be among them. And he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there will no longer be death. And there will no longer be mourning, or crying, or pain. The first things have passed away." How can we know that's coming? That's ours? Because he who sits on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." And he said, "Write, for these words are faithful and true." And then he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give to the one who thirsts from the spring of water of life without cost," the fulfillment of what he told the Samaritan woman. "He who overcomes will inherit these things, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. But for the cowardly and unbelieving and abominable and murderers and immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." And then he goes on and begins to describe the city. So, I think it's important that we come back and remember a few things. One, it is possible to succeed. We don't look at what God requires and think, "Well, I try every day and it's a battle every day and I'm going to lose here and I'm going to lose there." It's actually possible to do it, to actually succeed. To actually have it where he can write two churches letters not condemning anything. But then also that it's not for nothing. It's just that we're not wasting our time here. So, that's Philadelphia. Next we get to Laodicea, which will be interesting. And then we move on to the beginning, as it were, of the end. So, a lot of this is setting the precedence for what's about to come. But I think it's good that we hear this now, just as a good reminder, as Peter did with his churches, to remind of what we are, where we're going, and why we're doing it. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for the opportunity you've given us to be able to hear your word, to have the ears to hear what the Spirit is saying to the churches. But I ask that we actually hear it, to actually be hearers of the word and doers in so much as we would persevere and endure to the end. That we don't find it inevitable that we would fail, but that we would find it inevitable that we will succeed. Because he who is holy and true has guaranteed it. I ask that we simply look to remain faithful, and that be our goal so that we can endure to the end because of what awaits us. So as we don't lose focus on this, and that every day we do have that as our goal. It is in Jesus' name that we can pray. Amen.